also has been very critical to our fight against the war, or fight in the war on terrorism. And when the President of the United States is asked a question, is Egypt an ally, and he can't answer that question affirmatively, that tells you what kind of foreign policy this particular president has. He doesn't know what his foreign policy is if he can't tell you whether Egypt is an ally. Well, let me tell you, in spite of all that's happened in the last 10 days, and all of us still grieve for the loss of 4 very brave Americans who put their life in harm's way as civilians to advocate what's in the best interest of our country. But I will assure you, if Ambassador Stevens was here today, he would say absolutely the direction which the Paul Amendment takes us is the wrong direction in which to go. I know what the intelligence community thinks about this particular direction. I know that the Intelligence Committee thinks that in spite of all of our problems with Pakistan, and we've had our very open and overt problems with Pakistan over the last several months and couple of years, but the fact is that we've got American soldiers in harm's way today in Afghanistan who are fighting to protect the freedoms of this country and who are fighting to make sure that we remain the safest, most secure country in the world. And you cannot decouple Afghanistan and Pakistan. It is very important that we maintain a strong relationship with Pakistan, even though it is difficult and even though it is fractured. It's of critical importance that we maintain that relationship. It's important because of what's happening in Afghanistan, but it's also very important for another reason. We had a debate in this body about a year ago on what's called the START Treaty, which is a treaty that we have with Russia for the elimination of certain nuclear weapons over a period of time. During the course of that debate, we talked about the elimination of Russian nuclear weapons versus weapons in the United States, and that's good to a certain extent, but none of us in this body who have any idea about intelligence around the world have a great fear of any country getting a hold of a ICBM, a major intercontinental ballistic missile, sticking it in a sleeve somewhere and shooting it towards the United States. What we do have fear of is somebody getting a hold of what we call tactical nuclear weapons, sticking them in a suitcase and bringing them to the United States or putting them in a position to kill and harm Americans. Pakistan has tactical nuclear weapons. And as long as we maintain a strong relationship with them, as long as they are our ally, however you characterize that, then we have the ability to at least dialogue with respect to, with the Pakistanis with respect to their nuclear program. But even today, and I'll close with this with respect to that issue, even today, with all that's happened over the last 10 days and all the condemnation around the world from democratic countries and particularly within the United States for the condemnation of what's happened, and the consternation and appall at what's taking place from the standpoint of demonstrations in Pakistan and in Libya. The Libyan government and the Pakistani government have given us all the help that they can possibly give us, particularly in Libya. That's a government in transition. It's a temporary government. And we need to make sure that the people of Libya have the opportunity to hopefully have a democratic form of government one day. If we sever ties with them today, folks, that's over. And we can just make certain of the fact that we have one more territory, one more country where terrorists have the opportunity to be trained to kill and harm Americans. With respect to Pakistan, the Pak government has sent the Palace Guard to guard the embassy of the United States. That's their most elite troops. Now again, our relationship is frayed and it's fractured, but they are doing their level best to try to make sure that the Americans that remain in Pakistan are protected. And if we all of a sudden decide that we're going to cut them off from financial aid, is that going to improve the situation there? Is it going to give us some sort of satisfaction? It may, from the standpoint of of folks who don't like the idea of foreign aid, period. But let me tell you, from a national security standpoint, it is simply the wrong thing to do. There will be one country that will gain from this. The country that will gain from this is the most notorious terrorist-sponsoring nation in the world, and that's Iran. Iran has a very powerful presence in Pakistan today. They want to have a powerful presence in Libya, and I assure you that if we cut off the minimal amount of aid that's being talked about with this amendment, then we are simply fostering the ability of Iran to have a larger voice and a larger presence in countries that are very fractious and very vulnerable today. So while in spirit I agree with my good friend Rand, Senator Paul, this is not the right time in the history of our country and not the right time in the history of the world to take action that is simply not in the best interest of the United States.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Arizona.
In the last few days, several interesting things have happened, and some of them tragic. And, of course, beginning with the tragic loss of our brave 4 Americans and Ambassador Chris Stevens. And then the demonstrations that have taken place and everywhere. But also I'd remind my colleagues that there was a most sophisticated attack on one of the most heavily fortified installations in Iraq. It was professional. It was carried out in a professional fashion. It resulted in $200 million worth of loss to the American taxpayer, the greatest single act of destruction since the Tet Offensive back during the Vietnam War. In Iraq, in Afghanistan, because of the attacks of Afghan soldiers on American soldiers, we've had to suspend the operations between the military and police between the two countries. If there is ever an indicator of failure of our policy in Afghanistan, it is our now inability to even train with them to be ready to take over the responsibilities that we now hold. There is no greater indication of the failure of the President of the United States to continue to tell not that we need to, the American people and the people of the world, not that we need to succeed, not that we need to win, but that we need to withdraw. And so countries in the region have taken the lesson and are making accommodations. The fact is that we are now facing a collapsed national security policy in the region, beginning, of course, with the assertion by the Ambassador of the United Nations that what happened with Christopher Stevens and the other 3 others was, quote, spontaneous. The President's spokesperson saying the same thing. We knew it wasn't spontaneous. We know that people don't bring heavy weapons and mortars and rocket-propelled grenades to demonstrations spontaneously. This was a well-orchestrated, well-planned, well-executed act of murder of 4 brave Americans. And now we blame it on the video. It's the video. It's not the video. The video is the vehicle of the radical Islamists that they use. And don't think there won't be other vehicles. There are people now, I'm sure, all over the world that are making videos that Muslims may find offensive. I found it offensive when there was a picture that I won't even describe now, back some years ago, that was sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts. And we believe in freedom of speech. The first thing we should have said is Americans cherish and have fought for these freedoms, including freedom of speech. Very briefly, because I know my colleagues want to talk, we've totally failed in Iraq. Today, as we speak, Iranian aircraft are overflying Iraq to Syria and delivering weapons to Bashar Assad. We were supposed to leave a residual force there. We didn't, because then Senator Obama, who said that the surge would fail, where he was completely wrong, now has said that he is now celebrating that we're out of Iraq. They just sentenced their vice president to death. The tensions between Sunni Shia and Kurd have never been greater. And al-Qaeda is on the rise in Iraq. In the words of General Keane, the architect of the surge, we won the war and we've lost the peace. In Syria, we now have 25,000 people have been massacred. When's the last time the President of the United States stood up and spoke on behalf of these people? I mean, it's impossible for me to understand why the President of the United States wouldn't at least speak out against the murder, rape, torture that's going on and continues on, and an unfair fight with Bashar Assad supplied with Russian weapons, Iranians on the ground, which they have acknowledged, and of course, every day it goes by, more and more al-Qaeda infiltrate the country. In Afghanistan, of course they know we're leaving. Of course they are accommodating. The famous story of the Taliban prisoner and the American officer, and the Taliban prisoner says, "You've got the watches, we've got the time." America is believed to be on the decline and weakening. And so Mitt Romney was right. The statement issued by the embassy in Cairo was a semi-apology, which later the administration itself repudiated. This president does not believe in American exceptionalism. He does not believe in American leadership, and we have just paid a very, very, very heavy price for our lack of leadership. Leading from behind is not the role of America in the world, and appropriate lessons are being drawn from that all over the world. I'd ask my colleague from South Carolina if he has any more comments.
President.
No, I don't. Now to, I think, Senator Baucus
Mr.
wants to speak.
President, we yield the floor.
I thank my friend from South Carolina. Thank you, Senator from Arizona. I'll be very brief here because I know other senators wish to speak. This last conversation, I think, is extremely important. Northern Africa, other Arab countries are in a state of flux, to say the least. The Arab Spring has caused lots of questions and profound implications that we don't really begin to now fathom. Those countries don't have executive governments that have any experience. They've replaced tyrants who preceded them. The Muslim countries, many of the people living in these countries feel that other parts of the world are more wealthy and they've been put upon. Add to that, these are countries which, in most respects, have very, very high unemployment. And add to that, most of the population, the demographics of these countries are such that close to half of the population are under the age of, say, 25 or maybe under 30, maybe even younger than that. It's a powder keg. And these are countries which really don't have the history and the culture of First Amendment freedom of speech that we have. I say all this, Mr. President, because I urge all of us, both sides of the aisle, to work together. This is an extremely complicated, complex situation. It used to be not too many years ago that politics stopped at the water's edge. It used to be not too many years ago that in foreign policy issues, because they're really nonpartisan, we as a country work together. We face the country, the world, as one voice. So I strongly caution my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to not make this a partisan issue. That is U.S. policy in the Middle East, especially in this case Northern Africa, but rather we work together. It's so, so important. There's probably a reason why politics used to stop at the water's edge not too many years ago. That made us, because it made us a lot more effective worldwide. Again, I urge my colleagues not to be too critical of the other side of the aisle. It just gets us nowhere. It's dividing and conquering, and that puts us in a great point of weakness. Mr. President, I rise on another matter, and that's to recognize a very important event occurring this Sunday and Monday. What is that? 89 World War II veterans from the state of Montana will take part in the Big Sky Honor Flight. and come to Washington, D.C. to visit their monument, the World War II Memorial. Their trip is hosted by the Big Sky Honor Flight Program. The mission is to recognize American veterans for their sacrifices and achievements by flying them to Washington, D.C. to see their memorials at no cost. They raise money for Montanans all across the state to make this possible. I've helped participate. It's steak fries, etc. And in today's economy, their generosity, Montana's generosity in paying for these flights is really something special. And don't forget, it has to be 2 tickets, one for the vet and one for the person helping the vet, because these World War II vets have been around several years and they often need a little bit of assistance. One of the passengers on Sunday's flight is a 102-year-old. His name is Dr. McDonald W. Held of Billings, Montana. 102 years old. Don's had a remarkable life. He's been a United States Air Force intelligence worker, a professor, an author, a minister, and a college president. Don was born in 1909. What was going on in 1909? Well, that year, President Taft was inaugurated as the 27th president. The U.S. Army received its first delivery from the Wright brothers. Congress passed the Homestead Act, which resulted in a large influx of settlers all across the West, including my state of Montana. Don graduated from Baylor University in 1933 with a degree in speech. Although he earned his master's and doctoral degrees from Northwestern University, Don's heart remained at Baylor. He wears a Baylor workout suit every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when he exercises at the Billings YMCA. Remember, Don's 102 years old. During World War II, Don served in the Air Force as an intelligence officer in the Philippines. After the peace treaty signed, he was stationed in Tokyo. He worked just a couple buildings down from General Douglas MacArthur. After the war, Don embarked on his career in academics. He served as Howard Payne University as a professor there in 1955 to 64, presided over the speech and theater department, and served as academic dean. Don then worked for 7 years at Wayland Baptist University before moving to Billings, Montana. In Billings, he became the first head of the speech and theater department at the Eastern Montana College that we now know as Montana State University, Billings. At age 74, Don was ordained as a minister in the Baptist Church. He has ministered in 3 churches in Montana. Also served as president of the Yellowstone Baptist Bible Institute, now the Yellowstone Baptist College. Don and his wife Beverly have 5 children, 5 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren so far. His son Don Jr., a veteran of the Vietnam War, will escort him to Washington this Sunday. This is a special weekend for this group of heroes. Believe me, I was here when the last honor flight came in. I cannot remember a time when I've been so touched by people. When you see these World War II vets, some men, and most of the men and women, they're just talking about their experiences. They're the greatest generation, as been mentioned before, especially by Tom Brokaw. It's time to give them thanks for their courage. Time to give them thanks for their sacrifice. They've done so much. And it's time to reflect on all the sacrifices they've made. Just think of it. On the battles of Europe, Korea, jungles of Vietnam, deserts of Iraq, and those who are currently fighting in the mountains of Afghanistan. We must not forget them. Please join me in welcoming our Montana heroes to Washington this weekend. I'm going to be down there, and I know many others will too. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I thank again my good friend from South Carolina.
Absolutely. Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
I would like unanimous consent to speak in morning business for the next hour.
Without objection.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. President, we're going to have a nice discussion between Republicans and Democrats about an important issue. If you're looking for bipartisanship, your ship has come in. SJ Resolution 41 has 82 co-sponsors. I'm not sure we could get 82 of us to agree that Sunday should be a day off, but we've done it when it comes to the concept of not allowing the Iranian Ayatollahs to possess a nuclear weapon and try to contain them. So Senate Joint Resolution 41 has 82 co-sponsors. Mr. President, you're one of them. To my Democratic colleagues, Senator Blumenthal, Coons, Menendez, Casey. Senator Casey was the first one to step up. Senator Lieberman. There's just been a real joy to work in a bipartisan fashion over something that really matters. That is a time for the Senate to speak. It is now regarding Iran's desire to get a nuclear weapon. President Obama has rejected containing a nuclear-armed Iran as a national strategy. Mr. President, you're dead right on that. I know Governor Romney agrees. So what I would like to do is recognize my good friend from Georgia, Senator Isaacson, and we have Senator Ayotte here to share their thoughts, and I will be speaking a bit later, then certainly work Senator Blumenthal, who's been one of the real leading voices on the Democratic side for this resolution. So at this time, I'd like to recognize Senator Isaacson.
Well, I thank the distinguished senator from South Carolina.
Senator from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. President, and I want to, before he leaves, I'd like to acknowledge that today may be one of the more important foreign policy debates that ever takes place in the United States Senate, because whichever way the Paul amendment goes and this resolution goes is going to determine the direction of where America goes in terms of foreign policy. Are we engaged? Are we firm? Are we the greatest power on the face of this earth? Or do we recede as we did prior to World War II and put our nation in jeopardy again? I don't vote for receding. I think it's time to be strong. If there was ever an issue to be strong about, it's nuclear proliferation and the possibility of Iran possessing nuclear fissionable material to make a weapon. So I want to commend Senator Graham on his leadership in armed forces, his leadership on this issue, his leadership on the floor of the United States Senate. He is a beacon of hope in a body that needs it right now. And I want to also commend him for getting 82 co-sponsors. I agree with him. We could not agree that Sunday's a day of rest if we'd had to have a vote on it. But to get 82 people to come together and join to send a clear message not just to the Iranians, but to the world that a nuclear-armed Iran is not acceptable, and containing one would not be the policy. We need to have a policy of prevention. And that's what this resolution does. It doesn't just say to Iran, we want to prevent you from having nuclear fissionable material and a weapon. It encourages the world to join together to prevent it. Mr. President, 10 days ago I was in Germany, meeting with the foreign minister of Germany, meeting with the EU minister of finance, and meeting with the defense minister of Germany. You know what the number one question of all three of them was? It wasn't the problems with the EU, although they have them. It was Iran and what was going to happen if they ended up possessing fissionable nuclear material and a weapon. So this resolution is an important statement of the United States of America, but moreover the world. And I think it will be replicated in parliamentary bodies around the world to send that united signal. And we are close to a time where we're going to have to fish or cut bait. The Iranians have continued to work. We have pretty good knowledge, but not total knowledge. One of the problems the Germans had, the IAEA thinks they know where the centrifuges are and where they all are, but they're not sure. They think there hasn't been movement, and in some cases they think there may have been. We need clarity, and the only way we can get clarity is for the Iranians to agree to the rules that we establish for them to disclose through a United Nations or through whatever body possible, to see to it we have total transparency, and in the absence of that, they need to understand that our goal is to prevent them from ever possessing a weapon that could destroy humanity. The nation of Iran states clearly and often and tells the world that it yearns for the day it destroys the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. No entity, none whatsoever, that would make a statement like that deserves the ability to have enriched uranium or any other tool to actually carry out what it says is its stated goal. So I rise today as one Georgian, but as one of millions and millions of Americans, to send a clear and unvarnished message to the people of Iran. We want the people of Iran to know freedom and democracy, to be released from the tyranny of the Ayatollahs and the current totalitarian government. But most importantly of all, we will not stand one day, 1 minute, or 1 iota for Iran to possess nuclear fissionable material that could be used in a weapon to destroy mankind. And again, I end by commending the distinguished senator from South Carolina and yielding the floor.
And Mr. President,
Senator from South Carolina.
One, I want to thank Senator Isaacson, who is on the Foreign Relations Committee. He's a ranking member on the African Subcommittee, and he has really quite frankly, opened my eyes to what we're doing in Africa with a little bit of money goes a long way in Africa trying to prevent radical Islamists from taking over the continent of Africa, combating the Chinese who are trying to buy up all the resources, and using American taxpayer dollars to create an environment to create jobs back here at home, and quite frankly save thousands, if not millions, of young children from certain death from AIDS and malaria. Johnny is just, I think, everything right about being a senator in that regard, and I appreciate him coming down here today. If a senator from New Hampshire doesn't mind, can we go to our good friend, Senator Blumenthal? I've had the pleasure of going to Egypt with and all these other hot spots, and just really have enjoyed working with him on this resolution. This started with a meeting in our offices, an idea to try to back up what President Obama said about not containing nuclear-armed Iran, and the next thing you know, we're on the floor of the Senate with 82 co-sponsors. So my good friend from Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to begin by thanking my colleague and friend from South Carolina who has so eloquently and powerfully stated the case for this resolution. But even before discussing Resolution 41, I want to thank him and our colleagues who spoke today on the floor about the Rand Paul resolution. I think that this morning's debate, and I listened to it for all 3 hours because I was presiding at the time, really marked one of the finer moments of my brief 21 months as a member of the United States Senate. What I saw this morning was an articulate, thoughtful, and courageous statement against a resolution that would do grave harm to this nation's national interests if it became law and if it bound the United States government and cut off aid to these countries. I think that the case stated was courageous because it very likely may prove unpopular with some elements of their own party, to put very bluntly the political reality here. But I think it was one of the finer moments of this body because it marked a point of clarity and a clear recognition for the need to come together as a nation when our national interests are threatened, when our national security is at stake, when the harm to this nation requires acting together. And so I'm hoping that this spirit of bipartisanship will also come together, as it has so far with 82 co-sponsors on the resolution that we have sponsored, Senate Resolution 41, and it began, as Senator Graham has rightly observed, with the leadership of a handful of senators. He was one of the key leaders. So were Senator Lieberman, Senator Ayotte, Senator Hoeven, Senator Casey, Senator Menendez. I was proud to be among them. And the spirit of bipartisanship and the strength of that spirit, I think, was really extraordinary. Here is what we know. And at a time of confusion and obfuscation in many respects when foreign policy is concerned, knowing with certainty some of the facts here is very important. We all know from the International Atomic Energy Agency that as of November 2011, Iran had produced approximately 5,000 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 3.5%. We know also that this Iranian regime is the most active state sponsor of terrorism in the world, according to our Department of State. We know that this regime has repeatedly expressed its desire, and I'm quoting, to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Wipe Israel off the map. We know that this regime has provided weapons and training to Hamas, Hezbollah, and militias in Iraq that murder civilians and spread terror. And we know that it has already actively, consistently provided aid to the Assad regime in Syria in its brutal and unconscionable repression of its own people, the murders and torture that have occurred directly linked to Iran. We know that the Iranian government has succeeded in developing nuclear weapons. If it does, it will lead to an arms race in that part of the world, as threatening as any other potential harm to this nation. And we know that Iran would create access for terrorists, access for them to these nuclear weapons, making the Middle East a nuclear tinderbox. We cannot trust this regime. We know that fact beyond any potential doubt. Iran's nuclear program is of extraordinarily grave concern, not only to nations in that part of the world, but to all nations everywhere that want peace. And that is why an international coalition has come together with the leadership of the United States of America. Iran cannot be permitted to continue its nuclear program to a point where it is capable of making a nuclear weapon. And despite repeated calls for it to suspend or stop this program, we know with certainty Iranian leaders show no signs, none, of waiting or wanting to halt their program to build nuclear weapons. In fact, recent intelligence shows that they're continuing to enrich uranium and develop nuclear facilities. And that is why we need Senate Resolution 41. No question that the administration under President Obama has repeatedly affirmed his commitment to such a policy. The President has made this position, the position of the United States, absolutely clear. I'm quoting President Obama, quote, "Iran's leaders should understand that I do not have a policy of containment. I have a policy to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons." That is the message of Senate Resolution 41. That is the message that we must convey as a nation together from all parties, all parts of the United States, all interests, that time is limited. Time is limited to keep Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapons capability, so this resolution calls for increased pressure on Iran to come into compliance with the United States security resolutions. And this resolution builds on my efforts and others calling for successful P5-1 talks that would lead Iran to halt its nuclear program. This resolution says to the world that the United States and the governments of other responsible nations have a vital mutual interest in working together to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapons capability. Let us underscore the word and recognize its importance. A nuclear weapons capability. Many of us, and I've done so, have written multiple times to President Obama outlining a framework that would lead to successful negotiations. And my hope is that the combination of strict international sanctions and international condemnation of a nuclear-armed Iraq will convince that government to desist and cease its program of nuclear weapons capability building. It's not in our interest. It's not in the world's interest. Ultimately, it's not in that regime's interest. But if sanctions fail, we must be prepared to act. And so this resolution expresses the resolution and the resoluteness of this body. And I'm hopeful that sanctions will work. But if the government of Iran is unconvinced by this very compelling case, it must know that this issue is not a partisan one. It's not one on which we're divided. We stand together. We stand strong, we are resolute and resilient, and the United States and its allies will join together to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran. Again, I want to thank the Senator from South Carolina, all of the colleagues that have joined, all 82 who have joined as co-sponsors. We began with a handful, but the compelling power and persuasiveness of the need for this resolution, I think, is carrying the day. And I, again, yield to the Senator from South Carolina, my good friend and the leader in this effort.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
I want to thank Senator Blumenthal for those articulate words about the resolution and the kind comments he made toward myself. And the other Senator from Connecticut, Senator Lieberman, was on the ground floor of this effort, like he is on everything that deals with constructive foreign policy in the country. But one of the original partners we had in trying to get this thing going was Senator Ayotte from New Hampshire, who is a freshman senator, but who has really quickly hit the ground running and I think has become really a strong voice on national security. And with that, Mr. President, I would like to yield her whatever time she may consume.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I first want to thank my colleague from South Carolina who has really led the effort on this incredibly important resolution. I'd also like to thank my colleague from Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal, for his leadership on this issue. The bipartisan nature of this resolution tells you very clearly that this really is the policy of this Congress and how important this issue is for our country. This resolution will ensure that we give a clear message to Iran that it is not our policy, that we will not accept the world will not accept, the United States will not accept if Iran acquires the capability of having a nuclear weapon, because we understand that it will make the Middle East a very more dangerous place than it is now, causing an arms race there. In addition, it will also cause us to be in a position where one of our strongest ally in the Middle East, Israel, is threatened with annihilation, because that's exactly what the Iranian regime has said. And most importantly, it will endanger our own country if Iran acquires the capability and acquires a nuclear weapon, of having a nuclear weapon, because Iran is incredibly hostile to the United States of America. They participate with various terrorist groups, including Hezbollah. And one of the greatest risks we face is that the regime itself wouldn't use the nuclear weapon. They just give it to a terrorist group that could hit any one of our allies and also use it in a position to harm us and our country, and then the world, of course, changes. And so we cannot allow this to happen, and this is very important to have 82 senators sponsoring this. I want to talk briefly as well about the Paul Amendment that is pending before this body, because this amendment and how we act on it, as my colleague from Georgia so eloquently said, will define what is the policy and the foreign policy of the United States of America. And I want to state my strong opposition to the Paul Amendment, because I'm very concerned that if we pass the Paul Amendment, then we are sending the very message to the radical elements, the radical Islamists and the terrorists of the world, what they want to hear from us, which is that we will withdraw. Let's be clear what their goal is when they attack us. They don't want us to be engaged. They would like the Middle East to become a 7th century Taliban-style government throughout that is a threat to our country. And in my view, for us to now withdraw, to put ourselves in a position where, for example, the amendment is so broadly drafted that even if one of our allies' embassies were attacked, like Israel or another one of our allies, we'd have to withdraw aid, would send the absolute wrong message, and it would be to the detriment of the safety of the United States of America. I understand that my colleague, Senator Paul, is well-intentioned, but every time we have withdrawn, people have died, and the world has not become safer, and the battle becomes here. We don't want the battle to be here. We want any of these elements to not be in our country. We can't forget what happened to us on September 11th. And unfortunately, as my colleagues have eloquently stated before, our only tools can't be our military. The reason we have so many of our military leaders standing up and former military leaders saying that they oppose the Paul Amendment is because they understand that by engaging with these countries through the small foreign aid budget that we have, we can prevent conflict. We can actually be in a position where we are engaged and we are sending the message to the radical Islamist terrorists that no, the United States of America you cannot back us off. You cannot put us in a position where you can bring the battle to our soil. We will not be defeated by you. And I think that if we were to pass this amendment, no matter how well-intentioned from my colleague, we would only be empowering those radical elements. So I would urge my colleagues to vote against the Paul Amendment. And I also think it very much relates to this containment resolution for the following reasons. We see Iran right now ignoring what the UN has asked of it, ignoring what good people of the world want to have happen in Syria. In fact, Iran is supporting Hezbollah. It's arming and training Assad's forces in Syria. They're providing weapons to insurgents in Afghanistan who are killing our troops. They are engaged with radical elements in Iraq. And if you look at the whole course of events, can you imagine Iran will cheer if we pass, I think, believe me, if we pass an amendment that we would say that somehow we would back off to our commitment to Pakistan, our commitment to Egypt, and our commitment to Libya, and other areas around the world. God forbid one of our other allies, their embassies were attacked. And most importantly, Iran would cheer because if the Paul Amendment is passed, it would be, as my colleagues have said, actually breaking the Camp David Accord, where we agreed as a country to provide aid to Egypt. That would make Israel less safe, and there's nothing more in the world than the regime in Iran wants than to have Israel be less safe. In fact, they have stated very, very clearly, that regime, that their goal is to annihilate Israel from the face of the earth. We cannot allow them to get a nuclear weapon. They are marching closer and closer to this capability. Senator Blumenthal told you about the enrichment of the uranium. This is not the level of enrichment you used for a power plant. It's being enriched to have the capability of having a nuclear weapon. They have created more and more centrifuges despite us asking them to stop, despite the sanctions we have put in place, all for the possibility of them having that nuclear weapon that they could use that would change the world, and what they have said about our friend Israel, that they would seek to annihilate Israel. The world is a very dangerous place. If we allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon, this is a game changer for the world. That's why this amendment is so incredibly important, and I very much appreciate the leadership on both sides of the aisle in support of this amendment, and my colleague from South Carolina for bringing this forward, because we need to tell the world that we are not going to allow this game changer to happen. And Iran needs to hear a very clear message from us as a Congress backing up our president that we will not allow for the containment of a nuclear-armed Iran for the safety of the world. And finally, let our friends in Israel know, when Prime Minister Netanyahu said on September 16th, those in the international community who refuse to put red lines before Iran don't have a moral right to place a red light before Israel. Please know, our friends in Israel, that by passing this resolution, we stand with you, that we will work with you to make sure that that tyrannical regime in Iran never gets that weapon of mass destruction that could very much change the safety of the Middle East, the safety of your country, as well as our own country and the world. With that, I yield the floor back to my colleague from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
Thanks, Senator Ayotte, for helping get this whole process going and being on the ground floor and her strong voice on national security. Now I'd like to recognize my friend from Tennessee, Senator Corker. He's on the Foreign Relations Committee and is moving up the ladder, be chairman or ranking member, depending on how the election comes out. But no matter how it comes out, Bob will be there talking about constructive engagements and guarding the taxpayer dollar, and I'd like for him now to be able to speak to us his thoughts about the Rand Paul Amendment and the non-containment of a nuclear-capable Iran.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
I want to thank the great senator from South Carolina, where I was born, and I do want to say the committee makes those decisions, so I don't want to be anybody be jumping the gun on the kind of statements made earlier about future situations. I do want to speak, though, to both the amendment you brought forth on Iran. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the tremendous work that you've done to bring so many of us on as co-sponsors, and I think it's a really strong signal to Iran, but also people in the neighborhood about our beliefs. So thank you very much for that. I want to speak mainly, though, about the Paul Amendment. First of all, I want to say to the senator from Kentucky, I understand the sentiments that drive people to look at foreign aid the way that a lot of people around this country are looking at it today. I want to remind people that our total foreign aid budget is 1% of what we spend each year, but that doesn't mean we need to look at it in a very different way. And so we haven't done an authorization bill on foreign aid since I've been here. I've been here almost 6 years now. I know we have the senator from South Carolina is the ranking member on foreign ops, and I know they spend a lot of time looking at things in an appropriate way. But there's no question that as a body, we should be looking more closely at how we generate foreign aid to other countries, and I hope we're going to be doing that after this next Congress when we begin to function in hopefully a much better way. I do want to say, though, the purpose of foreign aid at the end of the day, in many cases, is to keep our men and women in uniform from having to be deployed in other places because of unrest that's against our national interest. And so I would like to point that out. In this particular case, really in pointing out Libya, Egypt, and Pakistan, I'd just like to point out three things. Number one, in Libya, the people of Libya are very thankful for our intervention. And because people have come in and created a travesty in Benghazi around our consulate there, these are people that are trying to undermine what we're doing there. And so the way the Paul Amendment is drafted, if terrorists in any country that we are aiding happen to do something at one of our embassies or consulates, then we withdraw aid. And so what that means is that basically terrorists, people like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other groups are basically deciding what we're going to do as it relates to foreign aid. Now, that would be a real big step for the United States Senate to say that in the future, everything that we do relating to foreign aid will be determined by terrorists. I just don't think that's what we want to do as a body. So let me set Libya aside and say this was obviously something that wasn't a popular movement. It was done by premeditated terrorists in this particular. It was terrible. We all love Chris Stevens and thank him for the work that he had done for our nation. But this is not the way for us to react in a country that's trying to evolve into hopefully a functioning democracy and somebody down the road that hopefully in some way will create even more stability in that part of the world. So let's move to Egypt. I was just in Egypt. I sat down with the military leaders there, and one of the things that we continued to talk about was the Camp David Accord. The aid that we send to Egypt is to reinforce in many ways the Camp David Accord that is very important to Israel, which is one of our major allies, one of the biggest allies we have in the world. So I don't know why we would decide we would cut off all aid, which would totally undermine the Camp David Accord, which would totally undermine the security of a country that is one of our biggest allies. Now, do we need to take into account the response in Egypt to what happened at our embassy? I think we should. And I think it should affect the negotiations that we have with them regarding our foreign aid. I mean, let's face it, we've had decades of relationships with their military, and even though there have been a lot of changes in the country, the military is still there, and candidly, they didn't respond exactly the way we'd like for them to respond, a great ally. The President was a little hesitant to respond. I understand the fine line that he's walking. He's just been elected. I understand the country really hasn't been through this process, and I understand that, you know, he didn't respond exactly the way that we would expect him to respond. He, since that time, has, but I still think it should affect our negotiations, and we ought to go slow, and it's my understanding that the senator from South Carolina, working with his counterpart, have taken those things into account as it relates to this next year, and I thank them for that. So, in Egypt, it looks to me like we are slowing this down a little bit. We're making sure the relationship that we have with Egypt is appropriate under the circumstances, and I thank the senator for helping make that happen. But withdrawing all aid would basically undermine totally the Camp David Accord, which most of us in this body believe to be something that's very important. So let me move to Pakistan. Pakistan's a place where probably most of us are most disappointed. We understand the relationship that the intelligence agencies in Pakistan have with the Haqqani network, and that's been disappointing. We understand the trouble we've had trying to close down some of the ammonium nitrate plants that are there that are actually helping create some of the IEDs that are used to dismember and harm and kill our men and women in uniform in Afghanistan. So we're disappointed about a lot of things in Pakistan. And obviously, one of the most disappointing things, or maybe one of the things that's most difficult for us to understand, is the treatment of this physician who aided us with Osama bin Laden. And yet, there is a legal process that's underway there, and I think we sometimes forget that that is also underway, and there's a court of law there, and hopefully that will have an outcome that ends up showing that it's been handled in a judicious way. But let me just speak to Pakistan. We're getting ready to leave Afghanistan. We're going to have all of our troops out of Afghanistan, or a big part of our troops out of Afghanistan by 2014. I met yesterday with General Dempsey. He was telling me that in order to meet that timeline, we had to move a truck load of equipment out of Afghanistan every 7 minutes between now and the end of 2014. Every 7 minutes. Well, what is the major route that we use to move our equipment out of Afghanistan? Pakistan. Now, if we want to cut our nose off to spite our face, I would say let's close off that route. Let's create enmity between us, more enmity than already exists. I think most of us realize we have a very transactional-oriented relationship with Pakistan. It's not quite the way those of us in America would like to see it be, but the fact is there are some valuable things there that really have a lot to do, by the way, with the safety of our men and women in uniform, because if you have to take another route out in getting all this equipment and material out of there, you're probably going to take a route that doesn't work quite as well for our men and women in uniform. So again, I understand the sentiment. Our phone is ringing off the hook with people who share the same sentiment, and I understand it. When you see on television people are rising up in these nations against us, by the way, these countries are not monolithic. It's not unlike here. We've got groups like Occupy Wall Street that are able to express themselves, but they don't really represent my viewpoint. But these countries are in some ways like ours. I mean, you have people who protest and do things. That doesn't mean the whole country feels that way. These are countries that have had strong men as leading their countries in some places and aren't used to understanding what it means to be able to express yourself, and they don't understand how to operate in a society that's more open than it's been in the past. So I don't think that certainly doesn't quell my strong feelings about what's happened in Benghazi, and nor does it for anyone else here, I'm sure. But the fact is that We need to look at foreign aid in a different way. I think we've taken some steps to do that. We need to continue to improve. We need to make sure that there's accountability. What I do know is the Paul Amendment is not the way to do it. And again, I appreciate the energy that the Senator has brought to this body and the many good points that he brings forth. But I know this. We do not want an amendment to pass that says that if terrorists attack an embassy or consulate any place around the world, aid is taken from that country. I do not want a terrorist determining what our relationship is going to be with that country. And I think all of us know that our withdrawal from the Middle East will leave us in a place, in a world that is vastly unsafe for our citizens, for people around the world. And while I know that our engagement needs to continue and evolve, I know that this amendment is not the way to make that happen. I strongly oppose it, and I will vote against it if we ever get a vote on this amendment. And with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from South Carolina.
I want to thank Senator Corker for a very good country-by-country explanation, kind of a big-picture, rational approach to what we're trying to do. I understand Senator Paul's convictions. A lot of Americans are frustrated. We're broke while we're giving money to people overseas who all hate us. Well, they all don't hate us. Some do, some don't. Let's invest in the ones we can live with and stand up for the ones who want to kill us all. And I'm going to turn it over now to Senator Hoeven. But one last thought about the world in which we live in. We could get hit in the next minute. We could get hit today. We could get hit tomorrow. They're trying to get here as desperately as they can. Thank God for every day we've been able to survive without being attacked again on our homeland. But I would say this. One of the reasons we've been effective after 9/11 is that we're in their backyard. We're deployed over there, not just with military force, but with assistance. We're making their life more difficult in raising money and operating and being able to maneuver and find allies. And to get to America now to attack us is harder than it was on September the 10th, 2001, because we're engaged in the fight. And if you withdraw aid, you take one of the most valuable tools off the table. And there has to be more tools in the toolkit than just bombing people or disengaging from the world. So this 1% of the budget is a godsend to those in the military. And now I turn back to S.J. Resolution 41. Senator Hoeven from North Dakota was my first Republican co-sponsor of the idea you cannot contain a nuclear-capable Iran, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate his leadership. So I'd yield to Senator Hoeven.
I'd like to thank the Senator
from North Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the Senator from South Carolina for his leadership on this incredibly important issue, and also express my appreciation for the Senator from Tennessee and my agreement with his remarks. I thought he was right on with what he said, and I support what he had to say. I'm very pleased to be a co-sponsor on Senate Joint Resolution 41 with Senator Graham. He is knowledgeable on this issue. He has dedicated an incredible amount of time and commitment to this effort. Recently, I was with Senator Graham and Senator McCain and others, and we were in Afghanistan, and then we were in Egypt, where we met with the Muslim Brotherhood, and then we were in Israel, where we met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Then we were in Libya, where we met with a number of the militia groups that now control Benghazi and Misrata and, of course, Tripoli. And we were in Tunisia as well. And I have to say, it's incredibly important that we had the opportunity to go to those countries. Senator Graham's been there many times, as has Senator McCain. But it's very important that we understand what's going on, and some of the comments that Senator Corker expressed are so true. We've got to understand what's going on in these countries. At the same time, we have to communicate with these countries as they try to build democracies. But we must be clear and consistent in our foreign policy that we support our friends, we support our allies, and we will oppose our opponents. And that we demand safety for our embassies and for Americans abroad. We provide no less to the people that come to our country, and we expect the same in return. Now, Senate Joint Resolution 41 is a bipartisan effort, and I want to express that again. That is so important. It is a bipartisan effort. 80 senators standing together and expressing their support, bringing this resolution to the Senate floor and saying to the administration, we need to take a tough stand with Iran. We cannot allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. It is not an option. Containment, a nuclear Iran contained, is not an option. It doesn't work. Look what's going on in the Middle East right now, in Egypt, in Libya, Tunisia, Yemen. Across the Middle East right now, you've got extremist groups, fundamental Islamic extremist groups that are undermining the democratic efforts in those countries. Look at the attacks on our embassy. Look at the killing of our ambassador. We cannot allow that, and we can only prevent that through strength. Through strength. So we've got to stand up for America's interests in all of these countries, and we've got to prevent a nuclear Iran. Iran is helping the extremists throughout all of these countries, supporting Bashar Assad in Syria, supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, all these groups that are undertaking violence throughout the Middle East, not only against Americans, but against their own people, undermining these nascent democracies. And the way that we help stop that, and the way we help support freedom and democracy, is through a strong, consistent foreign policy. And that's what this resolution on a bipartisan basis is all about, is saying to the administration, we must stand up to Iran, and we must prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. And if Iran were to develop a nuclear weapon, that could also start a race for other countries in the Middle East to develop nuclear capability. Look at the unstable situation there now. It is certainly not a situation where nuclear weapons can be added to the equation as well. We have worked in the Senate and the House to provide tools to the administration to put sanctions in place to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. The Kirk-Menendez legislation, which was passed as part of the Defense Authorization Bill, provides strong sanctions against Iran that still haven't been fully implemented. The best way to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is through sanctions. All options have to be on the table. We must support Israel in whatever action Israel determines it must take to protect itself. All options for the United States must be on the table as well. But the best way to stop Iran, if we can, is with sanctions. But the only way that's going to work is if they are fully imposed to the full extent possible. Let me use Kirk-Menendez as an example. What did that legislation provide? That legislation provided a tool to the administration which essentially barred any company or country that does business with Iran or its central bank from doing business with the central banking system in the United States. That is an effective tool because if Iran can't sell its oil, it can't continue to function. We must fully impose those sanctions. We must stand strong with our closest friend and ally Israel in the region. This resolution is a bipartisan message to our administration saying, stand strong. We can and we must prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. With that, Mr. President, I see the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader are on the floor, and I will turn the floor back to the esteemed Senator from South Carolina. And
thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
I'll turn this over. Can I have just 2 minutes to wrap up? I want to thank Senator Reid and Senator McConnell for scheduling this